Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. We're going to start up our panel now. I'd like you to ask you to please come in, take your seats, and please turn off or mute your cell phones and or BlackBerries. We greatly appreciate that. So thanks for coming on in. Hi, my name is Greg Bangs. I'm with Booz Allen Hamilton. Welcome to Energy Solutions for an Environmentally Sustainable World, which is certainly a topical issue given the developments over the past few months. I'd like to introduce our moderator. Jimmy Henry is a Booz Allen Hamilton Executive Vice President responsible for the firm's civil government business. He leads client work for agencies in sectors such as health, energy, environment, finance, homeland security, transportation, and international development. When he's not doing all that, he's also a member of the National Council of the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, and I can attest that he is an avid runner over the last few days. He's here to take you through this panel. Jimmy, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Greg, and welcome everybody to the Ideas Festival and our afternoon panel on solutions for an environmentally sustainable world. This is quite an audacious topic to take on in 1 hour, but we are going to give it our best. We are fortunate to have with us quite a collection of panelists to share this with you. So let me start by giving you some brief introductions. The second from your left is Amory Lovins. Amory currently serves as the chairman and chief scientist at the Rocky Mountain Institute, which he founded almost 30 years ago. He has served on many advisory boards, including for the Department of Energy in the United States, has received more awards than we have time to discuss today, is a renowned inventor, holds 10 honorary degrees, doctoral degrees from universities in the U.S. and the U.K., and I found this most fascinating. Has published 29 books. My 13-year-old daughter indicated that was probably 25 more than I had read, so I was thrilled to have him as part of this dialogue. So welcome, Amory. On my far right, your far left, is Dr. K.R. Sridhar. He's the founder and CEO of Bloom Energy. He has an illustrious career at NASA, very significant visibility and experience in leading their Mars program. He's been recognized in such areas as Fortune magazine. He appeared on 60 Minutes. He has been cited as one of the top 5 futurists inventing tomorrow today. That's quite a credential. That sounds quite appealing to this. Previously, he was a professor at the University of Arizona, so welcome, KR. Next to Amory is Marvin Odum. Marvin is the president of Shell Oil Company. He's the Upstream America Director of Royal Dutch Shell. He has had many executive positions with Shell over the years and has quite a varied background as a participant in such things as the American Petroleum Institute, the National Urban League, and has a long-time affiliation with the Aspen Institute. So welcome, Marvin. I hope you'll be as delighted as I am to notice that we have a fourth panelist, Ambassador Klaus Scharioth from Germany. He joined us yesterday and as a welcome addition to the panel. Had breakfast with him this morning and was able to really glean some interesting ideas that he's going to share with us today. He has served 33 years in the German Foreign Service, and prior to coming to the United States in this capacity as the ambassador in March 2006, he served as the State Secretary, which is the highest civil service post in the German Foreign Office. So welcome.
Thank you.
Before we get into the rest of this, the meat of this, I would like to remind you that yes, there's a lot going on in this topic, and yes, there is activity, important activity, crisis activity happening in this country, in the Gulf area. We're all aware of that. There are other discussions here this week that are specifically touching on that topic. I'm not trying to stifle good discussion, but however, remember the focus of this is on the future of energy and our movement as peoples toward the adoption of these various technologies. So please take that in the spirit intended. I had the pleasure yesterday of speaking with the Deputy Secretary of Energy in the United States, Daniel Poneman. He was going to be a part of the panel, but he expresses his regrets. He's fairly busy right now with certain activities, but he reiterated to me the administration's objectives of establishing a low-carbon future for this country, and that the role of the administration and the government is to help stimulate across a broad front initiatives which will help us as a nation do that. His other regret was that he is suffering the heat in the Washington, D.C. area at 100-plus temperature, so he's sorry that he could not make that. I certainly do not speak on behalf of the United States government. Let me state that unequivocally as well. So the gist of this topic is that we are facing, as global citizens, as citizens of the U.S., sort of turning points in our use of, our demand for the supply of energies of different types to allow us to live the lives we like to lead. There are behaviors we have in place, there are cultural things we have in place, and the essence of this discussion today was to help us identify the kinds of things that will stimulate us globally, recognizing the vibrant differences of nations, in taking these things on and moving from point A to point B over a reasonable time frame so that we can attain certain objectives that we as citizens globally have and that we as citizens of nations have. So this is a massive cultural issue, and as you can imagine, as you well know, the motivations for individuals, businesses, nations to move in that front, they are many and diverse. They range from the moral imperative to do something new and different because it's fundamentally the right thing to do. They range from incentives that might be provided by governments in a stimulative way to help this process. They range from the economic considerations which would drive people to act in certain ways. It's those and others that affect our ability to transform something, truly transform it and move it to something different. So I don't pretend to have those answers to that. Transformations are difficult. Cultural and behavioral changes are difficult. So what could be better than having 4 individuals here today who will share with us certainly their thoughts about it, but they're fact-based to that, and then to share with you those opinions and then pull from you some questions that might help us go that way. So what I'd like to do is take a few minutes for each of them to share with you some of their thoughts on this topic, to frame up some of the ideas. We'll follow that with a few questions, and then we're going to open it up to you to get this thing really going and make this a dialogue. So with that, maybe, Amory, if you don't mind starting out, we'll do this alphabetically. Not really, but why don't you get us going, if you would?
Okay. Well, yesterday morning at the Hotel Jerome, I was outlining Reinventing Fire, a roadmap we're writing at Rocky Mountain Institute for getting the country completely off fossil fuels led by business for profit. And there are, of course, many important innovations on the supply side, which I'm sure we'll be talking about here. I want, though, in these remarks to focus on much more efficient use of energy. Many people don't realize that we are now using less than half the oil and half the energy and only a third of the directly used natural gas and about 4/5 of the electricity to make $1 of GDP that we were using in 1975. And those improvements in our energy productivity continue, but they're accelerating, especially in electricity, where the rate of cutting electric intensity just notched up another factor from 1% to 2% a year in the past 5 or 10 years, and is set to accelerate much further as we start in more states to reward utilities for cutting your bill instead of for selling you more electricity. But we're just scratching the surface of how much energy efficiency is available and worth buying. In the late 80s, my team looked at about 1,000 technologies, measured cost and performance for saving electricity, and at that time found that you could save 3/4 of the electricity cheaper than running an old coal or nuclear plant, even if the plant and the grid were free. And now that technology potential is even bigger and cheaper because the technologies have improved faster than we've applied them. Looking decades ahead, we don't yet see an end to this technological improvement. In oil and gas, we showed in Winning the Oil Endgame 6 years ago, free at oilendgame.com, how to save half the oil and gas we use to provide the same or better services at about a fifth the price that we're paying for the stuff. And this comparison assumes that all the external or hidden costs of getting and using the hydrocarbons are worth zero, a conservatively low estimate. Now, the big headline I want to leave you with on the demand side is that this is not just about technology, but also about competitive strategy, corporate culture, public policy, and design. The design dimension is often left out. But we have figured out at our mine with many partners in industry how to make very large energy savings cost less than small or no savings. That is, how to get expanding returns, not diminishing returns, to investments in energy efficiency. This has now been demonstrated in hundreds of buildings, various vehicles, upwards of $30 billion worth of industrial redesigns in 29 sectors. Just to give the flavor, in the industrial redesigns, we're typically saving 30 to 60% of the energy with a 2 or 3 year payback on retrofits, fixing up old stuff. And in new plants, we're saving more, typically 40 to 90-odd%, and the capital cost goes down. Same in buildings, same in vehicles. Big savings can be cheaper than no savings. This is not yet in any official assessment of energy efficiency. It's mentioned briefly for buildings, but not for vehicles and industry in the new Academy report. And I think it's a real game changer, as important as the advances we'll see on the supply side. One last thought. I brought along a concrete example of how this sort of thing can work. It's my carbon cap. This is a little piece of carbon fiber composite that is extremely strong and stiff, but it can be made in 1 minute with the technology developed 1 hour down valley here in Glenwood Springs by one of our spinoffs. Well, think of this in Marvin's terms as a Saudi Arabia we just discovered drilling in the Detroit Formation, a very prospective play. Because if we make our cars and light trucks out of something this light and strong, half the weight and half the fuel use go away. It gets safer because this has 12 times the crash energy absorption of steel per pound, and it costs the same to build the car. The material costs more, but you save about 99% on tooling, 100% on the body and paint shop that go away, 2/3 on the powertrain, and that pays for the costly material, so the car costs the same to ultralight. That's the big revolution about to come to the car business, and it's going to make your life a whole lot easier because you won't need to find and extract all that oil you don't quite know where it is, right?
Thank you.
And it's a lot cheaper to save it than to extract it.
Thank you, Amory. So there's been a lot of prep work in engaging with all of these folks to get to this point, so you can see what I've been dealing with. This is exactly what I've had my share of conks on the head, too, in this thing so far. So, Marvin, why don't you go next, if you would.
Happy to. The pretty challenging topic, I think, to encapsulate into 3 minutes. So what I'm going to do is just try to set a very high-level framework, and then hopefully through the questions we'll get into the kind of details that you all want to talk about. But as the primarily oil and gas person on the panel, I do feel compelled to start with the statement, and it's really the acknowledgement that the energy mix globally is changing, and that I think it will change dramatically, and that's not a threat to me. I mean, I actually we welcome as a business, we welcome that change. Now, I think it's important how we define that change taking place, both aspirationally and realistically, and so I understand I separate those two. I think they're both very important because I think sometimes when we take the pure realistic approach, we miss what may be possible out there. So I think those boundaries are both very important. But looking at global energy demand, I think, is a core part of this conversation. So if I just approach that from the demand side and I take a very macro, long-term view. So I look to the middle of this century, 2050, and I'll make the statement, fairly dramatic statement, that demand consumption, energy consumption in the world could double from what it is today by 2050. And you know the story behind that, right? It's population growth. It's moving to 9 billion people in the world. That's 2 more Chinas than what we have today. It's an enormous hundreds of millions of people increasing their standard of living such that they start to consume energy for the very first time in their lives and in their families' histories. And so it's all these elements coming together to increase the demand for energy in that way. Now, when I say double by 2050, I actually include some pretty heroic efficiency gains in that calculation, not to the extent that Amory is talking about clearly. And I think this is one of the gray areas that's so important to us going forward. But there are efficiency gains in that conceptually. I think it tells us a couple of things, and they're not new statements. But the first one is there's not a silver bullet to this. It really is multiple solutions, and we need to pursue all of these solutions. And those solutions will likely vary depending on where your country is in terms of development and where you are around the world. Biofuels may make more sense in one part of the world, whereas electrification may make more sense in another part of the world. So we need those multiple solutions. I think the other thing that's the blatantly obvious statement about that much energy demand increase is the stress on the environment that goes along with that. And so if I just take what scientists tell me around the topic of climate change, because there's water issues, there's a number of issues, but if I focus on climate change and CO2, I'm told that we have to be producing half the CO2 that we do today, and in the world where I see we need twice as much energy as we do today. So that's some pretty dramatic change. I think as a business person, what I naturally tend to do is start to break that down into near and midterm opportunities, I would call them, and a longer-term view of things. So again, focusing just on the longer-term macro for now and near-term in the Q&A. I would project that we see biofuels, wind, solar, a number of other renewables adding up to as much as 30% of the total energy supply by 2050, by the middle of this century. So if you took my base assumption of twice the energy demand in the world and 30% of that being supplied by renewables, that's a growth in energy supplies beyond which this world has ever seen before. And there's, to the extent history is instructive at all here, you can look back over the last 100 years and say as new energy elements were identified, and you could use biofuels as an example, wind could be there in another couple of years. It's taken 30 years for any new energy source to equal 1% of the global energy supply. Now, I say that just because I think history is instructive. I don't think that's a natural law necessarily. I think it's a societal choice, and I think we can do a lot better than that and accelerate that change. But I think it leads us into the next very important part of the conversation, which is how do you affect that change? And I think this is where what we have to do is we have to have that powerful, effective collaboration between the private sector and the public sector, the government, setting the right policies, setting the right frameworks to enable both private industry and the government to put investments in the right place to develop the technologies we need to make those changes. So I think there are a couple of elements there I'll just mention very quickly, and then I'll stop, Jimmy. But the fundamental element that has to show up in that equation is a price on carbon. And it's something that we've been pushing as a company for quite a while. But part of that enabling framework to allow change to really start to happen is to create that level playing field by putting a price on carbon. One way to cost the other effects or implications of energy use. So look forward to your questions, but I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Marvin. Ambassador, would you share your observations with us?
Yes, I would love to share the German experience with you because I believe that some of it would be relevant also for the United States. And I would like my short remarks to make it in 4 parts. I would like to first say what our goals were, how we went about, second, third, what the results were, and then fifth, fourth, I would say something also about 2050. What were the goals? The goals were we wanted to do 3 things at the same time. We wanted to enhance the energy security because Germany is importing practically all of its oil and 86% of its gas, and we were not sure about the reliability of all those countries where we get them from. Second, we wanted to reduce CO2 emissions because we want to slow global warming, and we agree with you that that is absolutely essential. And third, we wanted to create jobs. Now, we believed that when we now thought, this was 19 years ago that we first tried to do it, and we then had a second phase in 2000, and that's probably the reason why Germany is right now the leader in solar energy and number 2 in wind and number 1 also in energy efficiency. We just started earlier. We made our own mistakes, and I can tell you that. So we tried to have, we tried to find the silver bullets, and we believed there were 2. Basically, one was increasing energy efficiency, and the other one was renewables. Now, energy efficiency, we started that 19 years ago, and we have been quite content. We have the aim was to enhance energy efficiency by 2% every year. We have done that. We have, in the last few years, we're actually getting closer to 3% every year. We have, since 1991, we have enhanced it by 45%, and we believe we can enhance energy efficiency by 100%, double it by 100% by 2020. So that's the easiest and the lowest hanging fruit. The most important thing we try to do is to enhance renewable energy. And we believed that we had to really make progress. And we concentrated on mostly three things: on wind, on solar, and on biomass. And the good news is that, or let's say that the bad news was that the first 9 years we barely made progress. We could, from 91 to the turn of the century, we could just increase the share of renewables in our power production from 3.1 to 5.4%. So that's not very much. And most of it in the beginning was hydro, and there was a limit to developing hydro. The real game changer was when we introduced in 2000 what we call the feed-in tariff, because from that moment on, we suddenly made huge gains. We increased it from 5.4% at the turn of the century to 16.5% last year, and we hope to reach 38% by 2020. And we have, in the last few years, always had 2 to 3% gain in power production by renewables. How does this feed-in tariff work? The feed-in tariff works just by a law which was passed. It's not a subsidy. The government doesn't pay a single cent. The government just guarantees everyone who has, for instance, a solar roof, who has a private windmill, that the power company has to buy the extra energy. So they have no choice, even if the power company doesn't want to buy it because the sun is shining and they have also that's extra energy, they have to buy it. And second, everybody gets a guaranteed price. And that means you really, and you see, that means and you have different prices for solar, for wind, for biomass, and all of that. And that really changed the equation, because nowadays you have 600,000 people in Germany, 600,000 families who produce energy on their own, and by a solar roof, by a windmill. And you do it if they like to do it because they think it's the right thing to do. It lowers CO2 emission. But it's not only idealism, it's not only the right thing to do, you also make a profit on it. And if you combine those two things, idealism and the possibility of a profit, that's a pretty powerful formula. At least it worked in Germany. Maybe it works here too. And so we had that, and we reduced the price every year, but you have a guaranteed profit in your 12th year when you have now, let's say, your solar roof or your wind turbine. Maybe more on that in the Q&A. Now, what are the results? We created, in the last 8 years, 280,000 jobs in the renewable energy industry, 280,000 jobs. We created almost the same amount in efficiency gains, in efficiency gaining industry. We could reduce our carbon input since 1990 by 28%. That's the most of all countries in the world. Our Kyoto aim was only 21%. We have over-exceeded it. We have reduced it by 28%, our CO2 emissions. At the same time, our real GDP grew by 33%. So it's not true that if you reduce CO2, you lose growth. And in addition, we could also cut our imports of energy, and by 2020 we believe that we could save 30 billion euro every year in reduction of oil and gas imports. I agree with you that in the future, not only do we have to do these things which I described, but we have to put a price on carbon. That's absolutely essential. One last word on 2050. There I have a slightly different view. Now, this is what I describe as not government policy. This is just a study which the government ordered and which came in just last week, where we try to ask the question, is it possible to have by 2050 an economy in Germany which uses 100% sustainable energy? 100%. No more coal, no more oil, no more gas. And the answer is yes, but it does cost money. And we could go to 100%. It would cost, in the first 10 years, a lot of money. In the second 10 years, it would cost much less. And in the last 20 years, it would really heap in much more money than we have spent before. So on net, the net value would be positive. What do we need to do? 3 things. We would have to introduce a smart grid. That's one condition. We would have to improve our transportation system, because wind and solar, which would produce most of it at biomass, you don't have them at all time. Sun is not shining always at all points. And so you need a transportation system and you need storage. Those are the 3 things which we need. Now, the first 2 are already developed. We exactly know how a smart grid would have to look like. We exactly know what kind of transportation we would have to install. We just need the money. The third thing, there we need new technology, because right now storage is not yet solved. You could pump up water, for instance, with hydro, but you also need batteries, and that's one connection to a topic which was here discussed a bit earlier. We hope to have 1 million electrical cars in 10 years, and many more by 2050. And those electrical cars would not only change transportation, they would also serve as storage. I stop here and I wait for your questions.
Outstanding. Thank you. Dr. Dr. Sridhar, please.
So it's good to go last. They've talked about the supply side. They've talked about the demand side. Let me take it back to sustainability. I found we've been talking about it all week. I found a very simple definition in a very corny card that you find in stores. It simply said, sustainability is when you think about the earth as not something given to you by your parents, but lent to you by your children. If you think of the earth as something that was not given to you by your parents, but lent to you by your children. So what's our responsibility then? Our responsibility is to leave more of the good things for them and less of the bad things for them every single generation. If you go back in history, throughout history, every generation has done that. Are we going to do that for our future generation? Or are we going to be the first generation that's going to say, no, that's not going to happen? I don't think so. None of us want to do that for our children, our grandchildren. This is sustainability. So energy and sustainability, they're highly interconnected. Why are they highly interconnected? Energy is capacity to do work. Work is economic output. If you want your child to have a better living than you did, there needs to be more work, more economic growth. It requires more energy. Yes, there is waste right now. You can cut the waste off. You can bring it to a minimum. But after that, it's not a US-centric view of how much we are wasting. There are 2 billion people on this planet that don't have access to electricity. There are 2 more billion that are going to be born that don't have electricity. So guess what? We need more energy in this planet, not less. But that's not a bad thing, because energy and the environment not being in congruence is just the way we used to do energy. Energy is not a zero-sum game. It is not unclean by definition. There is no scientific reason why renewable energy cannot satisfy an enormously growing need. In 1 hour, the sun shines enough photons on this planet to sustain the planet for an entire year, except we just don't know how to harness that. I'm not saying we need to harness every piece of that photon, every particle, but there are ways to get to a very bright, good future in energy. Think about every other good thing, from the tablet of the Moses, okay, to where information is. As we spread it around, as people had more information, not less, as the information haves and the have-nots, that bridge got closer and closer, the world was a better place. There are energy haves and there are energy have-nots. There is no reason why this bridge cannot be gapped. This gap cannot be bridged. So what we need to think about is, once we have that, what do we need in energy? 3 things: access, affordability, and sustainability. Access is key. Access cannot come to most parts of the world the way we do business, because we have very expensive centralized infrastructure, big power plants, with very expensive centralized transmission distribution systems, which simply means that if you cannot afford that level of capital investment, you're out of luck. That's why people did not have communication. Look at what cell phones did to the world when you didn't need the copper line. A lady walking in a fishing village in Bangladesh is walking around with a cell phone, talking to somebody, having a better life. That's the power of distributed versus centralized. Centralized is like communism. Distributed is democracy. That's the future of where energy needs to go. So that's access. The second one is affordability. It needs to be cheap. Look at what has happened with the cost of computing. Every bit what needs to be computed, when the best brains in technology focused on that as the issue. Look at how the cost came down, the Moore's Law. Why cannot there be an equivalence in energy? There will be. There absolutely will be. This is a huge marketplace. Guess what? It's doing good and making good in a multi-trillion-dollar market. We're capitalists at heart everywhere in the world. We will make this happen. So affordability will come. If you make it affordable, how do you make it affordable? You take very little of what you need and produce the most of what you can and use it in the best possible fashion, reducing waste across the board. If you reduce waste across the board, that's fundamentally sustainability. So I'm an optimist who sees this as the next biggest thing. And then you say, if you had all this energy, what would you do? And I'll leave you with a simple thought and answer it in Q&A. In the mid-'80s, I was a student at the University of Illinois, and Seymour Cray came in and talked about his supercomputer, Cray. And then he said, in a little box this size, in about 20 to 30 years, you will have more computing power than what the Department of Defense uses to produce this. And there are pundits and thinkers sitting there and saying, if you had all that energy, if you had all that compute power, why would you need it? And guess what? Today, we're so upset at this is not moving fast. What is the latency all about? I need faster computers. We know how to use it. That's how we'll use energy. The difference between dirty water and clean water is affordable, accessible energy. The difference between mining thousands of tons of ore to produce less than a ton of resource rather than reusing it is affordable energy. So abundance of energy is going to create a complete new economy and change this world in a revolutionary way.
Thank you very much. Excellent commentary. Thank you so much. Okay, so at this point, I think it's prudent to turn this over. I have some questions that I and some of my colleagues dreamt up, which are pretty good questions, by the way, but I think it's most appropriate to ask at this time for you all to engage us with some questions. So please put your hand up. We have people with microphones. We'll get them to you. I'd like to do 2 at a time so that we have one in place to make this efficient. Wait till you get the mic till you ask the question. So our microphone folks, this lady and this gentleman will be the first 2. Put your hand back up, please. So as soon as you get a mic, you don't mind if we do it the other way since he got the mic first. Please, sir. Hey, please state who you are and any affiliations so that if it's a bad question, we'll come after you later, okay?
I'm Darrell Morrow. I'm affiliated with my wife, Virginia.
Perfect.
We live in Aspen full-time now.
Perfect.
I want to ask a question to Mr. Odum, if I may. First, I want to compliment you on your great accent. Second is, if your supposition is correct, that by 2050, we must be using twice as much energy, and if only 30% of it comes from non-carbon sources, doesn't that mean that the carbon sources must increase between now and 2050?
It's a great question. So let me finish the thought I started there before. 30% supplied by renewables, as you say. In the current reality, and I'm sure I'd get some disagreement on the panel here, but in the current reality, if you're bounded somewhat by what we're capable of doing now, you'd say then the remaining 70% is made up at least of large portion of fossil fuels and nuclear energy, most likely. And so then that leads me to 2 different conclusions. One is you sure better find a way of doing fossil fuels in a way that doesn't release carbon to the environment, if carbon's the particular issue we're talking about. And the other is, I think as you've heard in some of the other comments, there will be new things that get developed that help fill that energy equation. I think, this is a personal view, that they can be very difficult to predict. I think as you're planning the way forward for the world, for a country, thinking specifically of the policy here in this country, it's why I separate the aspirational from what I call the realistic, because I think we need to be working on both paths. We want to follow a path that says there's a way through pushing investment into technology, enabling technology through frameworks to develop a no-carbon way of doing that. At the same time, I want to be working on a path that says, realistically, what can I really do to this massive energy system that uses so much fossil fuels now? What can I do in the next 10, 15, and 20 years to start to significantly shift that? And so then, we as a company, what we start to do is we start to shift from oil to natural gas. So I run around the world with this name of Shell Oil Company. And the truth is, by 2012, we'll produce more natural gas than we will oil. And that will continue to increase over time. And then we could tie it back and say, gas, if you run it through the chain, produces 70% less CO2 than oil. So there's a nice link there. The other big strategic push we would have as a company would be into biofuels. I mean, today's technology on sustainable biofuels, and I know that's a whole separate conversation, can produce 90% less CO2 than oil. So we've just started a $12 billion joint venture in Brazil, which is a place that wants to enable this type of development, to develop sustainable biofuels in large quantities to start to impact the transportation market. I won't go on with this forever. That's why we participate in wind, and we're a fairly significant wind player. But I'll also say, and this is one comment I just wanted to work into the conversation somewhere, specific to what individual companies do versus what we do as a society and industry in total. And I'd almost ask the question in reverse, what do you want a company like, in my case, Shell, to do? And the way we've taken that feedback and tried to answer that question is, it's doing the fact that the world's going to need oil and gas for a while, doing that better than we are today, and ideally better than anyone else. And it's starting to shift into those renewables where we have a particular capability where we can advance it faster than others, which is why I mentioned biofuels, and to a looser link, why I mentioned wind. It's also why we tested, but we're not still in solar, because we don't bring a differentiated capability to that technology. I'll stop there.
Amory, do you have an addition?
Well, having worked with World at Shell for 37 years now, I have a deep respect for what they do. I'm excited to see some of the developments Marvin's talking about starting to take shape. I believe you're the world's biggest seller of biofuels. and you just announced a very exciting development in carbon capture and storage that's now going from pilot to medium scale. And I think actually we're not as far apart on the numbers as might appear, because if we take your renewable fraction for a doubled energy world and then put in more efficiency on my lines, the whole thing gets easier and cheaper, and that 30% renewables goes to a larger number. This is the kind of future, indeed, that I think you've worked out in Germany, we're working out in the United States. And when you said the world's energy use could double, well, it could. On the other hand, it doesn't have to, because the future is choice, not fate, and we can exercise that choice very flexibly, especially when you remember most of the economic growth that you refer to in particular, Kara, is in countries like China and India that are building their infrastructure the first time and can more easily build it right than fix it later, as we have to do. As an example, half of the electric demand growth in China in recent years was for air conditioning. The National Renewable Energy Lab just announced a way to do that 10 times more efficiently, and I think we know how to do another factor of 10 on top of that.
Thank you. One more comment from the ambassador, please.
I respectfully disagree, with what you said, Marvin, and I would give for that two reasons. First, you yourself said that we need to put a price on carbon. If we put a price on carbon, and it should not be too low a price, then you will see that the other technologies will drive out fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, because it is, if you put a price on carbon, it's much more expensive. So that's the first reason. The second reason, I think, why we have to do better than just have 30% renewables, and I said we hope to have 38% by 2020 and could imagine to have almost 100% by 2050. We do need to do it because the sources of fossil fuel are, let's say, less dependable than they used to be. We got our oil and gas in the old days from the Netherlands, from Norway, and from Britain, by Shell and by others. Mm-hmm. Very reliable partners. We import 98% of our oil. Now, from whom do we import it now? It's totally different sources, right. Much further away. Countries which are not all democracies. I don't want to mention countries because I want to keep my job. So you can imagine which countries I'm talking about. They are not quite as reliable. And also, you see, we import 98% of our oil. The United States already today imports 65% of its oil. This will increase. And so I think there are really two very forceful reasons: the price of carbon and the need to protect our climate, to protect our environment, to protect the clean air, but also let's say, unreliability of the sources of fossil fuels.
I have to add one comment to this, because I think
it's getting spicy. Stand by.
And I don't disagree with anything you said, Ambassador. But this might be interesting to you if you didn't know it. I'm disappointed, certainly, that there is not a price on carbon yet. And the quicker that becomes a global price, the better off we all are. What I will tell you, as a company, internally, we have a price on carbon. And I'll tell you what it is. We apply $40 a ton to carbon on every project that we invest in. So as I look at all my choices of where to put the money, we even though it doesn't exist in reality yet, we apply a $40 a ton charge. And it does change the way you develop. It doesn't exclude oil and gas, but it changes the way you invest.
Can I ask a favor? I know we said a question. Can I ask you to direct it one way? We have a colleague who is catching a flight. I wonder if you could direct it to Dr. Sridhar. I hope that is that possible? Thank you.
It sure is. I'm not sure he'll have the answer. I think.
I bet he does. I'm happy to leave. No editorial comment.
If he doesn't have it, he'll make it up, guaranteed.
Okay. I'm Vicki Brooks. I'm from Aspen and Stanford. And my question is, have any of you, but you in particular now,
Thank you, Vicki. Yes.
Heard about the plateau in Spain that has now found the ability to store solar energy in, I think it's liquefied salt, and as a result of this one plateau, able to provide electricity for a certain part of Spain for free or for like a penny, or I mean, just for hardly anything. Someone at Stanford said that was possible, and he seemed to know. It was.
If you have his phone number, we'll call out and check it out.
Storage is your single biggest issue. As you go to renewables, you got wind, solar. The sun doesn't shine all the time. The wind doesn't blow all the time. And you got to make hay when the sun doesn't shine. That's electricity, right? So storage becomes the single biggest issue. There are multiple pathways to get there, and there is not a single, clear, economic, scalable way today that we see a solution. There are many pieces that multiple people are working on. But ultimately, it's that affordable solution everybody is looking for. We need a few solutions, and what you have to believe is, remember the first cell phone, remember the first PC. They were expensive, but people invested in it. Corporations invested in it because there's a clear technology pathway to bring the cost down. Everybody knew that there's an end game there that was very, very affordable. So we need to pick those, and the single biggest policy the world governments can take is simply to buy those technologies in the early days and not pick winners and losers. Be technology neutral. Try everything out. That's the role of the government. If the government had not purchased the military planes, you and I would not be flying planes today. If the government had not bought the big supercomputers, we will not have computing in this world today. If they had not built the ARPANET, we will not have the internet. Similarly, in energy, they need to buy. Government needs to be the early adopter, the leader in doing this, and we need solutions. With that, it's not an editorial comment. I just need to leave. Thank you.
And you're
Thank you
making
so
your
much.
fuel cell ultimately reversible, right?
Okay, before you add, other hands up for a question. This lady, and then a second one. Ma'am in the back, yes?
I have a microphone here.
Amory, you were going to comment on?
Yeah. I think the role of storage has been exaggerated by many commentators, not only here but in the whole energy debate, because we say, well, photovoltaics and wind are variable. Yes, but our simulations for, let's say, Texas, an isolated grid with a fairly undiversified set of renewables, are not showing this at all. We're getting extremely high renewable fractions by doing three things. We diversify the renewables by type, so the weather that's bad for one is good for another. We diversify them by location, so they're not all seeing the same weather at the same time. And we free up a lot of grid capacity to do that with efficiency and distributed generation and demand response. And then we forecast. This is called weather forecasting. We're pretty good at it. It turns out if you do that and then you integrate the variable renewables of different kinds and places with the supply and demand side resources you have on the grid, you get extremely high renewable fractions without bulk storage, with full reliability. We are using plug-in hybrid cars as mobile storage. That's very important and very advantageous to all the parties. We've worked out with industry some good ways to do that through our Smart Garage project. We are so far assuming ice storage on air conditioning, but not yet using the rest of the demand response resource, which is also about twice as big as had been thought. So when you use a simulation model as we do that has color graphics output, you can really see how all the moving parts fit together. And in our utility work, it's turning out that that this was not realized before only because they had mainframe computer models that would give reams of numbers you couldn't understand after they ran overnight on a mainframe. Ours runs in 20 or 30 seconds on a Mac, and with the color graphics output, you can really see how all the pieces fit together and how you back down the fossil plants in the German fashion whenever the sun shines and the wind blows. So they had 4 German states last year that were 38 to 47% wind powered, no problem, no bulk storage, because gradually by experience they've mastered how to integrate the variable renewables into the grid. I don't know whether we'll get to 100%, but it doesn't much matter because you could always run the combustion turbines on biogas from feedlots, for example. And I think storage is going to turn out to be much less of an issue than had been thought. It's really an organizational learning problem much more than a technical problem.
Please.
I wanted to know if the ambassador from Germany, if you could share some of the mistakes that Germany made so that the U.S. doesn't make the same mistakes and we can have a quicker learning curve.
Yeah, we should only make interesting new mistakes.
You see, we thought that you could subsidize special technologies and yet you could just solve this problem by subsidizing. And that doesn't really work. And I think other countries making the same mistakes in Europe have found out now too. Now, we really made the big jump forward only with a feed-in tariff, which does not constitute a subsidy. There's no subsidy at all. It just means that the power companies have to buy this renewable energy. And that means that currently every German household, the average German household, pays about $5 more for energy than they otherwise would pay. But they gladly do it. There's big consent on that. And so the other thing where we learned is that not always you need money. For instance, to increase efficiency, we just constituted a law that when you want to sell refrigerators, you have to not only advertise how much energy it uses, but also to quote, and we actually said this has to be this big on the front of the refrigerator in the showroom, how much it costs per year to run this refrigerator. Mm-hmm. And that within half a year, it changed the whole thing and didn't cost a cent. Because when you see in your showroom, this refrigerator is, let's say, $100 cheaper, but in about 9 months, these $100 are gone because the other one, which is a bit more expensive, it's much more energy efficient. And so, and there I agree, you need the government to pass some laws. Otherwise, you see, probably nobody would have thought about this, so to speak, compulsory advertisement of energy-efficient refrigerators. And that, of course, is used for other products as well. So a subsidy is not necessarily always the best means, is what we learned, but sometimes you just need to pass the right kind of law.
And let me just clarify, the $5 extra is per month or per...
Per month.
Well, you probably more than make up for that by reducing your exposure to volatile gas prices, for example.
Absolutely. You see it, and you see that's absolutely true. And you see, this is, so to speak, the worst case scenario, the $5. Currently, it's a bit lower. But and it is, of course, made up. If the gas price goes much higher, it would be much less.
When we talked about that this morning, that's part of the point about, nothing's free. You have to do things for the right sets of reasons, a multitude of reasons, one of which is economic, and some of it is just my attitude. I'm willing to pay a little more to get this thing a certain way.
If I could add maybe one thing. You see, we have been among the first to push nuclear power, because it was invented in Germany, Otto Hahn and all of that. And so in the 50s and 60s, we heavily subsidized nuclear power generation. And we were among the countries in Europe having the most power production in nuclear energy. But then we made a decision, because we came to the conclusion that this is not a renewable energy. You need to buy uranium. It has other disadvantages, which I could share with you. And we came to the conclusion it's the wrong thing to continue to subsidize that. And in 2000, we stopped that and we put all the money in renewables. And I think that's the reason why we are number one in renewables. And because we figured, it's always hard choices, We had subsidized nuclear a lot before. In 2000, we stopped. And of course, it still exists. We still have nuclear power plants. But we don't subsidize the further development.
And you don't expect to build more, whereas in this country, our new nuclear plants, if any, are subsidized over 100%, and still they can't raise any capital.
All right,
question over here. Question over here.
I'm sorry, there was a woman in the back that had put her hand up.
We've been waiting for some time. My name is Jack Hittery. I serve on the NREL Council. My question initially is for Amory and the ambassador. I'm hoping Marvin will continue to spice it up as well. Question is really, when we look at the U.S. and Europe, more and more support for renewables, for clean tech. when we look at our activities abroad, our foreign aid, we seem to be going another direction. Let's take Haiti as an example. Haiti just had a terrible calamity, and the U.S. and Europe and other donor countries are about to spend $400 or $500 million to rebuild the energy infrastructure, where 80% of folks there never had electricity in the first place. We're about to sign a check to put LNG, to put a gas infrastructure, and there's actually no domestic gas in the country of Haiti. It's been shown by a lot of independent experts that putting solar and biomass and a combination of a variety of energies together would actually produce enough energy domestically with no external importation for the country of Haiti. The same thing, for example, where...
Excuse me, what is the...
So the question really is...
We have a few minutes, so please be precise in the question. Thank you.
The question is, how do we think about our foreign policy when it comes to Haiti, when it comes to our aid via the World Bank, when it comes to our extension of ourselves from Europe, from the U.S., around the world? We're trying to do something domestically, but yet when it comes to helping Haiti, South Africa, places like that, we seem to be taking a slightly different tack via the World Bank, via things like that.
Yeah. And indeed, the World Bank just put an enormous amount of capital into a coal-fired power complex in South Africa, which will run for a long time, put a lot of carbon in the air, and suck up all the money that should have gone to efficiency and renewables. There is a new head of the U.S. Agency for International Development, and he and Secretary of State have quite different ideas on the lines you've suggested, so I think we may be in for some very salutary policy changes. Let me give a quick example of why this matters for other reasons, too. Cuba, a few years ago, had 220-something days of serious blackouts in 1 year. The next year, 3 days. The next year, 0 days. Why? Because on export credits, they got a whole shipload from China of China's most efficient, which are as good as our best, lights, fans, refrigerators, and so on. In 9 months, it being a dictatorship, they were installed all over the country. And they retired the least reliable 5 of their 11 breaking down all the time Soviet-era power plants and went to a much more distributed set of generators, initially diesel running on free oil from President Chavez, but they want to go to wind next. They have a lot of it. In netted mini-grids, so if one went down, it wouldn't take down the whole region or the country. And this Cuban energy revolution is quite remarkable. I've actually sent a memo on it to the theater commanders in Iraq and Afghanistan in the hope it will inform our reconstruction there, because we've had 3 runs at making a resilient, distributed, efficient energy system in Iraq, and the White House vetoed it all 3 times, not the current inhabitants of the White House. Maybe we'll get it right the 4th time. Finally, we have a special responsibility in Haiti because in World War II, I believe it was the Navy bulldozed a lot of the mountaintops in the hope of growing rubber trees when we lost the Pacific Island rubber supplies. Well, the rubber didn't grow, but the topsoil fell down into the valleys and down the rivers. And a lot of the rural poverty in Haiti was of our making. We need to do a lot of biological remediation there and put the forest back. I think we have now the biological techniques to fix this problem.
Let me close with 2 quick. Thank you, Emery. Let me close with 2 quick comments. That will be the end.
We still need to spice that one up.
Yeah, let's hear from our colleagues very quickly. We're right at the end, so let's hear, please.
Yeah, I would like to agree with you who asked the question. And you see, climate and energy have become foreign policy issues, and they have become development policy issues. And that's why where Germany tried to push so much for, first of all, an EU climate and energy policy. We did get the results there. And we also think that it's necessary to have a worldwide climate agreement. So we push very hard for it. Even if Copenhagen was not a success, we will continue to push for it. But we also, this is not something which we should just wait for. At the same time, we are restructuring our development policy. And we are trying, because we know if just Germany now is going to 38% or 100% renewables, that doesn't solve the climate problem. It solves our energy dependence problems, but not the world climate problem. And therefore, we restructure our development aid and will increasingly try to help other countries to also go for a much lower CO2 imprint.
Thank you. Marvin, why don't you close us out, please? Thanks.
Well, I really do have to go back to the previous conversation because you asked to spice it up a bit. As controversial as this might be, I do it in just a couple of statements to say, I think it's a mistake to think that if anyone in the world is investing in anything other than wind, solar, or biomass, that they're making a huge mistake or an irrational choice. I mean, there are a lot of smart people in the world looking at a situation today, making choices that need to be made for a lot of different reasons. Now, that doesn't take away from the way I started the conversation from my side, which is there's huge gains to be made here. But I have a wind business, I have a biofuel business, I have a predominant oil and gas business. I don't know when the last time in here someone tried to build a wind farm in the U.S., but it's literally just as easy to build a refinery as it is to build a wind farm. Now, that speaks more to a policy issue than an efficiency and other, but it is a very challenging thing. You look at some of the renewables, I'm just presenting some of the challenges. I think there are solutions to these, but if you look at the various elements of renewable energy, lithium into batteries and others, there are resource constraints and future concerns if that begins to be developed on a worldwide scale, which is what we'd all like to happen, but there are some issues with doing that. It's not as easy as just saying we want to do it. Final comment, not to take away from the tremendous opportunities and efficiency and what I think is an amazing job that Germany has done in its transformation. That's it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your attention and participation. Thank you. And our panelists, thank you so much.